Hello, everyone, and welcome to the channel. If you've ever stepped into a psychology lecture, cracked open a psychiatry textbook, or even just dipped your toes into philosophy or the human mind, chances are you started at the same place most of us do, at the altar of Sigmund Freud. Freud and psychoanalysis didn't just shape culture, they fundamentally changed how we think about the mind and how it works. His ideas about hidden conflicts, dreams, and the unconscious were revolutionary. Yet, here's the fascinating paradox. The way psychodynamic therapy is actually practiced today bears very little resemblance to Freud's original practice. It's a lot like Hippocrates in medicine. He laid the very foundations of the field, gave us the tools and the mindset to study and treat illness seriously. But most of his specific theories about humors and bloodletting, for example, don't hold up in modern practice. In this new series, we are going to explore the core foundations of psychodynamic theory, not as historical relics, but as living principles that still inform how we understand patients, build formulations, and guide therapy in everyday clinical settings. A quick disclaimer: I am not a formally trained psychoanalyst. Everything I'll share comes from my own deep reading of Freud, the neo Freudians, and contemporary psychodynamic thinkers, always with an eye towards what actually works in general psychiatric practice today. There's also a reading list in the video description below if you want to explore further. And here's something special we're going to try to do in the series. We'll try to understand some of Freud's most profound concepts through the timeless lens of Ghazals and Bollywood, the poetry of longing, conflict, and the hidden depths of the heart. Stick with me till the very end to see how beautifully they connect. With that said, let's dive into our first section: Freud and beyond. Let's begin with a real case that sparked a revolution in psychiatry. Meet Bertha Pappenheim, better known in the literature as Anna O. She was a brilliant 21-year-old woman from an Orthodox Jewish family in Vienna. In the 1880s, while caring for her dying father during family vacation, she developed a series of bizarre symptoms: sudden inability to speak certain languages, transient paralysis on one side of her body, periods of complete amnesia, wild mood swings, and even suicidal thoughts. If she had lived a few decades earlier, doctors would likely have labeled this hysteria and sent her straight to an asylum. But Bertha lived in the late 19th century, Europe's age of enlightenment. This was the era where oxygen and hydrogen were being discovered, the steam engine, the smallpox vaccine, Darwin's theory of evolution, and the first systematic studies of human anatomy and physiology. Mental illness was being rethought. The rise of mesmerism, later called hypnotism, introduced a radical idea. There might be an unconscious mind where hidden disturbances could cause physical symptoms previously dismissed as hysteria. Enter Jean Martin Charcot, the famous neurologist, the same one behind Charcot Marie Tooth disease, Charcot's joint, and hundreds of other eponyms. He demonstrated that symptoms could be triggered not just by damaged nerves, but by ideas themselves. Charcot's student, Joseph Breuer, took this knowledge to treat Bertha using hypnosis, and something remarkable happened. In trance, Bertha began talking freely about her symptoms, and she could trace them back to their emotional origins. When she expressed those buried feelings, there was an emotional discharge, and her symptoms dramatically improved. Breuer called it the talking cure. Excited, he shared these findings with his young mentee, a bright young neurologist who had just started his own practice. Guessed it? Sigmund Freud. Now let's dive deeper into Freud himself as a person. Freud was deeply inspired by archaeology. In 1873, when he was just 17, Heinrich Schliemann, a German archaeologist, discovered the lost city of Troy using ancient texts and clues. That story lit up Freud's imagination. He drew parallels with heroes like Moses and Hannibal. If you ever visit Freud's consulting room, photos still exist, of course, it was filled with ancient statues, Egyptian relics, Greek artifacts everywhere. This was no accident. It became the running theme of everything Freud would build, digging deep into the hidden, uncharted territories of the human mind, just like an archaeologist uncovering buried civilizations. So let's picture the mind like a planet. The surface, the landmass, is what we are consciously aware of. The vast ocean below is the unconscious, deep, mysterious, powerful. Between them, a coastline, what Freud would call the preconscious, like a beach where some things can be brought to mind. I love this metaphor because it's so intuitive. The ocean influences the land in ways we can't always see. And when we encounter thoughts, feelings, or memories we don't like, we chuck them into the ocean, we repress them. But here's the problem: chuck too much in, and eventually the ocean overflows. Now let's zoom in. This planet has countries. The deepest, wildest, most unclaimed part of the ocean, that's the id, the seat of our primitive drives: aggression, sex, hunger, pleasure. It runs purely on the pleasure principle. I want it now and I want it all. Then imagine a highly developed country obsessed with progress, trying to pave over every trace of the ocean. It's the home of ethics, law, culture, art, but it's also rigid and judgmental. That's the superego. The last part to develop, the most civilized, but sometimes foolishly trying to erase all natural impulses. Finally, there's the balancing country, the face of the planet. It interacts with the outside world, mediates between the id's raw demands and the superego's harsh rules. This is the ego, the mediator. When the id or superego pushes too hard and creates conflicts with reality, the ego experiences anxiety and deploys defenses to keep things under control. As the poet Gulzar beautifully put it, when the heart, id, wants to love wildly, but the mind or superego says no. वल्लाह ये धड़कन बढ़ने लगी है, चेहरे की रंगत उड़ने लगी है, डर लगता है इश्क करने में जी. The ego steps in, hides the conflict, deploys defenses, and much of Freud's psychoanalysis was about uncovering what lies behind these barriers. So, this was Freud's big innovation. Personality isn't a single thing, it's these three structures in perpetual dynamic tension. We're all born with the id, pure instinct, right? This gives rise to certain drives which have a source, a physiological source, an aim to satisfy the drive, an object which satisfies the drive, and an intensity or how strong the urge is. For example, hunger has a source. It could be from your stomach because it's empty. It sends signals to your brain saying that something's wrong. We're empty here. We're running on empty here. Maybe your blood sugar has fallen low. So these physiological sources are present for hunger. You experience the sensation of hunger. Now, hunger has an aim, right? It wants to satisfy itself by ingesting food or ingesting something with some amount of caloric intake, caloric value, right? And an object which satisfies it. In this case, it could be food or drink. And an intensity, how strong the urge is, how hungry you are. You can easily imagine that. Freud boiled psychic energy down to two major instincts: eros, that is life, love, creation, and thanatos, or death, aggression, and destruction. This energy, or libido, flows between the systems, creating tension that we must resolve, and that process is how personality develops. To understand development, think of libido as streams of energy flowing through the body through different areas at different points in your life. Freud said that we start with the oral stage from birth up to around a year, where pleasure is centered on the mouth, sucking, eating, breastfeeding, biting. Right. Later echoes can be seen in behaviors such as dependency, overeating, addictions, or even something like biting sarcasm. Right. This is followed by the anal stage between the ages of 1 to 3 years, where pleasure is predominantly felt by holding in feces and then expelling them. Right. This is the point where toilet training is introduced. The child has to learn to delay gratification of their impulses. Right. Expelling feces is pleasurable, but society, or rather the parents, tell the child that no, you're not supposed to do this. You're supposed to hold it in until certain periods of the day or certain places specifically. If the toilet training here is too strict, then the child may develop anal retentive traits such as stubbornness or miserliness, or sometimes the child may rebel by being anal expulsive, by forcefully expelling feces to rebel against this harsh toilet training, which can manifest later in life as messiness or a tendency towards cruelty. This is followed by the phallic stage between the ages of 3 to 6 years, what arguably may be the most crucial stage of development according to Freud, because this is where the Oedipus complex is encountered. Right, very, very, very roughly, a boy falls in love with the mother and sees the father as a rival to this love interest because mother loves the father. So the child begins to fear that the father will punish him for this desire, that he will castrate him for this desire. So the child, to avoid this conflict, because the child can't really go and fight with the father, he's physically too weak for that, the child identifies with the father. He internalizes the role of the father, of the male figure in his life. And this internalization of the father figure is what becomes the superego. The precipitate from this Oedipal complex is what the superego is formed from. He also described a female version of it, including terms like penis envy, which was much more controversial and much less accepted, challenged multiple times later as well. We won't go into the details of that. The key developmental products of this stage, Freud argued, was in the formation of two major taboos. Right, the first is a incest taboo, that the child cannot have sexual relations with his mother, and this gradually extends to the rest of the family as well, right, with may expand to other female members or whatever sex the child is attracted towards, that within the family I cannot have sexual marital relations with these people. And the second is that um, a taboo against filicide, or against killing of the father. Right? The father cannot be killed, the father cannot be harmed, and the father must be obeyed. Right? This may not always, so this gradually extends from a physical father figure to a more metaphorical father in terms of society, of culture, of religion, for example. All of these, Freud argued, were forms of the father that the superego has internalized. Right? The cultural rules, norms, religious beliefs that the child has begun to incorporate into his mind at this point starts from the resolution of the Oedipal complex. Following this stage, the child goes into a stage of latency for a few years, with the genital stage finally emerging at puberty. Up until this stage, the libido was narcissistic in nature, focused on pleasure for the self. At the genital stage, some of this becomes channeled outwards into genuine object choices. The adolescent begins to love others for altruistic reasons rather than narcissistic ones, and turns into a reality oriented socialized adult. Depending on how these stages were resolved in childhood, the adult may manifest differing personality traits and different symptoms when under states of anxiety. Moreover, the satisfactory resolution of the Oedipal conflict in particular ensures that the individual has a normally functioning id, ego, and superego. He's able to balance the conflict between his physical and biological desires and the restrictions and taboos imposed on him by society. A recent example that I saw was in the classic 1981 movie Silsila, starring Amitabh Bachchan, written by Yash Chopra, which he himself said that is one of his favorite films, although it sort of flopped at the time of its release. So, in this movie, very briefly, the character played by Amitabh Bachchan, conveniently named Amit, is an easygoing playwright who's in love with Rekha, but following the death of his best friend and sort of brother figure, he marries his pregnant widow Jaya out of a sense of responsibility. But Jaya then has a miscarriage, an accident, whole other this thing. And Rekha, who is now also married, coincidentally meets him again. Right, so she gets back into his life, and they start rekindling their romance, and they start having an affair. So towards the climax of the movie, they run away together, right, away from both of their existing husband and wife rather, and they go to, I think, Shimla. Here he encounters one of his old friends who has a conversation with him. So his friend is basically inviting him and Rekha to a celebration at his house. It's, I think, his father's anniversary or something, his parents' anniversary, right? But he tells him that you and Rekha should come separately. Don't come as a couple, because people know that you're married to different people and you're having an affair, and it won't look good. It won't be acceptable for us if you come together. And Amit has a sort of, is disappointed hearing this, and he sort of has a conversation with him about this. So his friend tells him that when he did this noble act of marrying his friend's pregnant widow, he, to quote the friend, he said, "Devta ban gaye the Amit aap hamare liye. You had become like a god to us." Right? To which a very despondent Amit replies, saying, "Ab main insaan banna chahta hu. I want to become a man now." But his friend immediately rebukes him, saying, "नहीं बन सकते हो अमित. आदमी इंसान से देवता बन सकता है, लेकिन जब देवता से इंसान बनना चाहे तो लोगों की नजरों से गिर जाता है." A man can become a god, but if he tries to become a man again, society will lose all respect for him. That once you begin to function according to your superego, society will respect you, but will never let you go back to your base desires again. We see many such examples on a daily basis with respected members of society who may have contributed significantly to their fields, to their community, losing all public standing following some or the other scandal that society deems taboo. We may argue ad eternum about whether this is justified or not, but Freud simply states that this is the nature of the human psyche. Continuing the scene further, Amit asks his friend, आदमी अपनी ख्वाहिश कोई छोटी सी तमन्ना के लिए नहीं जी सकता? Can't a man live for his wishes or for some small desire that he has? And pat comes the reply, बिल्कुल जी सकता है. बस्ती छोड़ दे, जंगल में बसेरा कर ले, पर्वत पे डेरा डाल दे, या फिर अपने कपड़े फाड़ कर खुद को दीवाना मशहूर कर दे. है हिम्मत इसकी तुम में? Of course you can leave the city and go live in the jungle or some mountain, or even better, tear off your clothes and declare yourself a madman. Do you have the courage to do that? By these lines, his friend further reinforces that he's free to live out his desires, only that he will have to do so as a societal outcast. In practice, Freud used free association, asking patients to be a passive observer to their stream of thought and say whatever comes to mind, along with dream analysis to interpret and hypothesize about what lies repressed in the unconscious. His theory was that discharging this repressed libido would lead to a decrease in symptoms. Going back to the metaphor of the planet, Freud would try to ease the patients into a state of relaxation that would allow small streams of the id to flow into conscious awareness, and try to interpret these streams to guess at what lies hidden. As the poet Bashir Badr put it, अगर फुर्सत मिले पानी की तहरीर को पढ़ लेना, हर एक दरिया हजारों साल का अफसाना लिखता है. Now, before we talk about the challenges that practitioners ran into, let's pause for a moment of honesty. These ideas may seem quite ridiculous to you, and I won't blame you. The psychosexual stages in particular haven't really held up to the test of time. Modern critiques are many and fair. The model has been called Eurocentric, that it's rooted heavily in 19th century Viennese bourgeois culture, phallocentric with concepts like penis envy that haven't aged well and lack strong empirical support, and overly deterministic in linking adult pathology so directly to childhood sexual development. Many contemporary psychodynamic thinkers have moved away from rigid adherence to these stages themselves. However, the foundational ideas that Freud laid down still echo powerfully in how we understand and practice today. Here are the three core insights that have truly endured. The first is about an unconscious mental life. We do not fully know our own hearts and minds. Many of the most important things, motivations, conflicts, desires, take place outside of awareness. As Gulzar Sahab so beautifully put it, किसको पता था पहलू में रखा दिल ऐसा बाजी भी होगा, हम तो हमेशा समझते थे कोई हम जैसा हाजी ही होगा. Who knew that the heart that lies hidden would be such an idiot? I always thought that it would be a moral person like me. हाय जोर करे कितना शोर करे बेवजह बातों पे एवे गौर करे दिल सा कोई कमीना नहीं. It forces itself on me. It makes a ruckus. It focuses unnecessarily on irrelevant things. The heart is an absolute scoundrel. We think we understand ourselves, but the unconscious reveals surprises. The second principle that has endured is about conflict in the mind. People can be of two or more minds about the same thing. We can hold loving and hateful feelings towards the same person, desire something deeply while fearing it, or want mutually contradictory things at once. This reminds me of the famous Qawwali line, काली काली जुल्फों के फंदे न डालो, हमें जिंदा रहने दो ए हुस्न वालो. Don't ensnare us with your beautiful black dresses or hair. Please let us stay alive, O beautiful ones. Intense desire tangled with fear, all directed at the same object of beauty. This internal ambivalence is something we still see every day in our lives as well as in the clinic. And lastly, the third principle that Freud introduced is that the past lives on in the present. Our early experiences teach us certain templates, scripts about how relationships, safety, and the world work. And we tend to apply those templates in new situations throughout life. That's why in therapy we look for recurring patterns and themes. What the patient is experiencing now is often a consequence of a series of actions, events, and relationships that has led them here. Again, Gulzar captures it so poignantly when he says, उम्र कब की बरस के सफेद हो गई, कारी बदरी जवानी की हटती नहीं. Age has rained down and grayed my hair, but the black clouds of youth still persist. By God, my heart has started beating faster, my face has started losing color, I'm afraid of sleeping alone, my heart is still a child, is still inexperienced. Dil to bachcha hai ji, abhi kaccha hai ji. The goal isn't to dwell endlessly on the past, but to free the person from its rigid grip so they can live more fully in the here and now without repeating patterns that cause pain and suffering. Freud himself put it memorably that unexpressed emotions never die. They are buried alive and they'll come forth later in uglier ways. These three ideas, the unconscious internal conflict and the living past, form the living heart of psychodynamic thinking, even as details have evolved. Now, coming back to practice, has anyone ever tried applying Freudian principles directly into practice in terms of, the couch method of psychoanalysis, free association, for example? Do let me know in the comments if you have any experience with this. The major issues that practitioners ran into was that patients would often just stop talking and refuse to progress in therapy. Freud would say that this is the point where resistance is being encountered, and this is the point where you need to dig deeper, that there's something here which their conscious mind does not wish to acknowledge, right? This is the part where therapy begins. But very often patients would just not progress despite your best efforts. The patient also had a passive role in simply talking a lot about whatever comes to mind and then getting an interpretation from the psychoanalyst. And even after getting an interpretation, many would just not accept it. Even those who did accept it rarely found that it made much of a long term difference. Symptoms simply shifted to different forms. Freud had set the foundation of psychoanalysis, but the practice and application of it would need to evolve further. This would be spearheaded by Freud's intellectual heir, his own daughter, Anna Freud. Join me next time as we delve deeper into how psychoanalysis evolved after Freud, especially through the lens of Anna Freud. Thank you.